I'm Bryan Young, weed scientist at Purdue, and so hopefully this is the stop you wanted to be at, the weed management one. So in terms of weed management, be honest, I haven't had a happy talk in a while. It's been kind of depressing for about 15, 20 years now because it's always a challenge, right? There's always something. It seems like I'm a pessimist. Anything good this year about weed management?
They're still alive and growing.
So good for us, not the weeds. I like your positive attitude about something then. Okay. Anything? Anything work real good you want to brag on? Anything you wish worked a little bit better? Okay, there's a lot of that going around, isn't there? Any I told you so's? I told you should use a higher rate. I told you should have sprayed last week. None of that? Maybe a little bit. So we're going to talk about resistance management. And why are we talking about resistance management? Because if weeds weren't resistant to herbicides, we wouldn't be having this talk. You know, if Roundup still worked, heck, if Pursuit still worked, atrazine worked like it used to in the 60s, we wouldn't even need this stop. There would be no weed stop on this whole tour. So it's because of herbicide resistance that we're here, not just resistance to one herbicide, but multiple herbicides. So I'm apparently not very good at giving talks on herbicide resistance management because we haven't fixed anything in 20 years. So I want your opinion. What's a good piece of advice you'd give to somebody to manage herbicide-resistant weeds? What would you tell them? Like, this is what I've done and this works good. Looking for some participation here. And I'm not afraid to call on people.
Rotate your modes of action.
Rotate your herbicide modes of action. That's good. And not just any modes of action, but the ones that are actually working on your important target weed species. Okay, rotating modes of action. Got it. Are we doing a good job of that in general?
Within the limits of what's available.
Yeah. Well, that whole Roundup in corn and Roundup in beans and, well, now 2,4-D or dicamba in corn, 2,4-D dicamba in beans. That's not too creative right there, is it? So we can do better. All right, what else do we have? Rotating our modes of action. I like it. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I might tell you something a little bit better.
Spray when they're small.
Spray when they're small. That's the biggest mistake we've made ever since I've been in weed science since the 90s. Spraying big weeds. You can say, well, the weather didn't let me in. It rained too much. Couldn't get in. I have too many acres to cover. It's the custom applicator's fault, right? They didn't get there when I wanted them to. I told them to get there sooner. So we're using herbicides today that if we don't apply them at the right time, we're not going to kill them, because not everything is Roundup anymore. So whether it's dicamba, 2,4-D, or if it's Liberty, you better spray them when they're small, otherwise good luck. If it's hot and dry out, guess what might happen? You might have a good guess based off of this year. If it's really hot and really dry and the weeds aren't growing, how well is your herbicide going to work in a post-application? Not the best. Is there anything we could do about that? No, I don't control the weather. There's nothing we can do about it. We're at the whim of Mother Nature there. But that's the herbicides we have today. They're not glyphosate reincarnate. They're just the best we have left over, right? Okay, so spray them when they're small. I like that. If I had an award, I'd give it to you right now, but I don't. Anything else for resistance management? I'm looking for something. Actually, two somethings. I'm not afraid to call them people, and you were twitching right there, so.
I don't know, cover crops?
Cover crops, that's a cultural practice. I was going to ask for, give me one example of a non-chemical weed control practice. Why is it so hard to break the trend of just using herbicides for weed control? Why is it so hard? I grew up row cultivating. Dry beans and sugar beets, not soybean or corn. Why is it so hard for us to break that trend? Herbicide and more herbicide and more herbicide. We use herbicides because they are
Fast and easy.
If they weren't recording this, I'd say something about that. But fast and easy isn't always the way you should go. So herbicides have been easy, right? They can cover the acres. And they have been effective, really effective, more effective than I was hand weeding, frankly. So that's why we always go towards herbicides. But cover crops can be used to help suppress weeds. They're good and complement your herbicide programs. Give me another non-chemical weed control factor.
Canopy closure.
Canopy closure. How are we going to close that canopy? Somebody's telling me earlier, somebody's getting big yields by reducing their soybean density so that you get more light down in the canopy. What's that going to do to weed control? We have things working against each other now, don't we? Yeah, we do. I don't know if I can solve that one, because if yield's telling you need to have lower densities, weed science would say you need higher densities. I don't know where the middle is. Maybe I'll just say it's 140,000 because we're there, right? I'll just leave it at that for now. But you can do better at managing weeds by narrowing your row spacing to something like 15s or 7.5 compared to 30. Then you could almost double your seeding rate and still not see the same benefit. Okay, so row spacing is the key for that, not seeding rate. I want one more thing in terms of resistance management that you haven't said yet, and this can include herbicides. You rotate your herbicide modes of action, but what else do you do? All right, multiple modes of action. So who's using Enlist this year? Okay, so I assume you have weeds resistant to Roundup. That's why you're in it to some extent. Did you use both Liberty and 2,4-D? No, that's too pricey. You couldn't find it. That could be a $40 program. Who's doing that? That's nuts. Well, if we're just spraying one herbicide to control the weeds, and that's the only effective one that we're using, we're just begging for resistance again, right? It's just a selection process. So now I'll finally go to my list. You knew it was coming. I just wanted you to mention a few things. So there are cultural practices such as a cover crop idea, row spacing. For mechanical, nobody wants to hand weed, but that's on the list, got to cover it. Tillage, I'm not going to tell a no-tiller they need to get out the mower plow. I don't think we need to do that. Anybody hear of somebody electrocuting weeds these days? A weed zapper, a weed shocker? You've heard about that? Have you seen it? Some people in organic are using it because there's value in that market, right? Is it sustainable, using a weed zapper? If you think from a global perspective, is that sustainable? So you can have a 40-foot weed zapper, which is putting out about 200,000 watts, enough to power about 20 homes. So is that sustainable? That's a lot of power. It seems a little bit wasteful. If a herbicide could have done the same. So there are some options, but they're not as sustainable. So can they be part of a system? Maybe, if you need a rescue, a little bit of help. Let's see. Let's go down to chemistry. So I have down there residual herbicides. So residual herbicides, why are they important? They're not magic. They're not magic at all. But there's two reasons why we don't get as much resistance to soil residual herbicides. Because a lot of the resistance we have to date is to the post herbicides. You think about water hemp and its journey. First became resistant to ALS herbicides. That was pretty easy in the 90s. Then became resistant to Roundup. That took a little bit longer, right? 12, 15 years, depends on who you are and what you have. We've already confirmed dicamba resistant water hemp in Indiana, and not just at one site, but multiple. Liberty and 2,4-D, they're still okay, but not great. We can see on a project I have with United Soybean Board, multiple states throughout the Midwest, Mid-South. Over time, we made field collections for the last 4 years. Progressively, we've seen a reduction in the activity of those herbicides on water hemp populations in the field. So we're selecting for resistance already. Whether you have it on your field or not is questionable, but we're selecting for it. So we already are asking for punishment there, okay? Now, what happens if you fail with the post-emergence herbicide? And you might have failed this year with 2,4-D or Liberty or even dicamba. What was your response to that? What'd you do? Did you go hand weed? Spray it again with what? Maybe the same thing, right? Unofficially. Yeah. You might spray. And so when we fail at the post-emergence herbicide, we try to spray the same darn thing again and hope for the best. and that leads to a lot of resistance. When you spray a residual herbicide, that first day you apply it, it's out there, maybe 10, 20 times higher concentration than the soil needs to actually kill the weed. So we're selecting for high-level resistance mechanisms initially.
So when should you spray the residual?
Well,
Like if you're doing an early burn down of cover crop.
Well, that's where we might have to start separating it out. You need to time that cover crop burn down at the right time for you to get your planting done. But can you put your residual herbicide out there as early as what you're terminating your cover crop? When do you terminate your cover crop?
End of March.
End of March. I was asking a lot if you're looking for residual water hemp control in end of June or mid-June. I was asking a lot. So that might be a separate application where you do an early post. When are you planting your beans?
Well, first week or two of April if you can.
Yeah. So ideally, maybe that's when you come in with, some residual for water hemp.
Putting two on,
Well,
burn down, then another one.
maybe.
Early post.
Depends on how good your cover crop is. Is your cover crop good enough to suppress water hemp initially through April? Well, then maybe no. Maybe just a burn down. Maybe. Or you use something cheaper. Cheaper is a relative term this year. But maybe like a dimetric, a metribuzin, or maybe metolachlor, dual type thing. Something that doesn't, break the bank initially for that first application. And then come back with something stronger at planting time or shortly after. Okay, so soil residual herbicide. You're using it, initially you apply it, it's a high concentration. You're selecting for high level resistance, which is going to be less common than what we select for with post-emergence herbicides. Post-emergence herbicides, that weed just has to survive what you sprayed that day. If it does, it's going to survive and live, and that can be low level resistance. All right, so what happens if you fail with the soil residual herbicide? What do you do to clean that up? You spray a post-herbicide, right? So do weeds that escape a soil residual herbicide typically go to seed? Hopefully you kill it with the post-herbicide, right? So that's why we don't have as much resistance to soil residual herbicides, because we have another action plan afterwards. After we fill out the post-herbicide, sometimes we don't do anything about it, just hope for the best with another shot. And then talk about it to some people and go to therapy, right? So that's why soil residual herbicides are so popular. I'm going to assume that you're up to speed on all the herbicide resistance problems we had through 2021. I'm going to talk about some of the latest things over the last year. So dicamba, or auxin resistance. So we've confirmed dicamba resistance in water hemp in several states, including Indiana and Kentucky, Illinois. You're essentially surrounded. Ohio, doesn't matter, right? So we know that's happening. How about 2,4-D resistance? Well, University of Illinois has documented 2,4-D resistant water hemp. Nebraska has. Missouri has. So that's a matter of time. What about group 9 resistance, glyphosate resistance? Aren't we done talking about glyphosate resistance and new populations? We're concerned about the grasses now. You might have heard that Kentucky's been having a lot of ryegrass over the years. They even have now some Johnson grass resistant to glyphosate. There was one individual in the earlier group that talked about they can't kill their Johnson grass with Roundup. If we can't kill grasses with Roundup, what are we doing with Roundup? So that's a concern, major concern. Group 10, which is Liberty. Now, the only place that screwed up Liberty so far is Arkansas, but that's what they're known for. They're good at it, right? They mess up a lot of herbicides. We haven't confirmed that in water hemp yet, but we're seeing less sensitivity in our field collections. All right, moving over here. Group 14, you're familiar with that. Cobra, Flexstar, Blazer, can't control water hemp anymore, right? Yeah, we've been down that road. I'm going to skip all the way down to group 27. So Callisto, Armazon, Impact, those types of herbicides, Lotus, Caprino. Before that used to be water hemp resistance in Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas. States that I would say, I don't care, right? But now we can find more of it in Indiana. We've confirmed it over the last year and a half or so, and it's become more of a problem at the commercial level. Part of it is because Callisto's now cheap, it's generic, so we're not using full rates all the time. But after June 20th, we can't even use dicamba in our corn acres anymore, right? As a good tank mix partner for those herbicides. So I don't like that. I wish we could get dicamba back for normal use in corn. Soybeans is another issue. We can talk about that later. So the last one, Group 15 herbicides, Dual, Residual, Outlook, Warrant, okay? So University of Illinois has confirmed some resistance there. Why are we concerned about those herbicides? It's because we use the Group 14 herbicides in corn, sometimes 2 applications, a pre and a post. I just mentioned you could use Dual in your cover crop burn down. Well, that's a Group 15 herbicide. And then many of you might be using Dual pre-emergence in beans, following up with an overlapping residual of a Group 15. So some fields are getting it 4 times over 2 years. Now we haven't had major resistance, but University of Illinois has now confirmed resistance of that chemistry in water hemp. And they also found that that population that's up by Champaign is also resistant to 2,4-D, Callisto, Atrazine, Classic, and Flexstar modes of action. We do have a population similar to this in Indiana. And it's a type of population where no matter what we do, we don't get ahead of it. We've even tried mowing, and my last resort, probably next week on this population, is I'm going to try gramoxone. That's where we're at with it. So good thing this is in the alleys that I'm trying to beat back because we can spray gramoxone. In crop, obviously, we can't do that. So we have some challenging weed species. So can we keep on spraying the Group 15 herbicides and expect good activity? Can that be our expectation? What will happen? We will find that resistance, right? We will find it. So what should we do to help delay that process? Like, we don't want to find it, so I'm going to do this. What is this? What is that practice? You guys said it before. I asked you what are the best management practices, and you said it. Rotate the chemicals, that'd be one. I don't know if we have enough chemicals right now to rotate away from this group, though, frankly. So if I want to keep this in corn and beans, what else do I need to do? I think it's coming back there. Use another mode of action with it. That's what we need to do. So don't use it by itself. Use another good mode of action with it. So you don't need to look at the specifics of this chart. All I need you to see is this is Palmer amaranth control up in northern Indiana, central Indiana to some extent. But the higher the bar, the greater the level of weed control, okay? So that's good news. These numbers on the bars indicate the number of modes of action involved. So there's a Group 15 herbicide, a Group 14 herbicide, and a Group 5 herbicide. And I'll explain what those are. But this has 3 different herbicide modes of action that have activity on Palmer amaranth for residual control. In general, I'm stealing some of your dirt there. I'm going to call it dirt. What do you see from left to right? What happens as you go from left to right with the control? You see overall better control, higher levels of control, and more consistent control no matter what the treatment is. That's right. What do you see in terms of how many modes of action are combined in that pre-treatment as you go left to right? You see more or less? You see more modes of action. So a Group 15 herbicide, like a Zidua, Dual, or Outlook, yes. Group 14 herbicide for soil residual, we're talking about Authority and Valor type products. And I know that some don't like using those. It might be a cost issue, or it might be they injured my beans and are in high rainfall conditions. I think I reduced my stand. Well, apparently 100,000 is all you need anyhow, right? So it's coming to the point where you're going to have to make a decision about, do I want to kill weeds or do I want no crop response? It might be hard to get both, be honest with you. And I can share with you that more than 95% of the time when I see crop response on soybeans from some of these Group 14 herbicides like Authority or Valor, it's temporary. So it's not going to stick around and it's not going to impact yield. That's what all the data would say so far. So it's kind of like Cobra post, except you're using something like that pre. You know, just walk away a little bit. As long as you get good growing conditions, you have the final stand there, it'll be okay. What's the group 5 herbicide? That's the atrazine-like compound, but you can use it in beans. What's like atrazine, but you can use it in beans? Sencor, metribuzin, dimetric. So that's the other mode of action. I was surprised. We used some high rates this year. I bet you're probably using in that, 5-6 ounce range. Helps out with the burn down in no-till. To get residual, and if you want that residual, you know, research that we did this year, we had to be above 10 ounces. 10 ounces or above. Now, how good is it? It was as good as a Valor or an Authority in that research this year. So there's some value in some of these other herbicides. So we can get more consistency, and you're going to say, well, how much is all that going to cost? Well, it's not going to be cheap, but how much does it cost to apply Roundup 2,4-D, known as Enlist 1, and Liberty in one pass this year? Wasn't that about $50 a treatment for no residual application post-emergence that sometimes failed? Yeah. So I think somebody said it earlier today that if you spend a few more dollars pre, it could save you a whole lot more dollars post. Because post, we're just trying to rescue fields. All right. How long do you want that residual to last? A long time. Okay, somebody's dreaming. Wake them up. So a lot of things can go 3 weeks, because this is 3 weeks right here. And that's a high level of control. 6 weeks after planting, 9 weeks after planting. The blue and the gray bars indicate whether we used a half rate or a full rate of Authority or Valor. And then here's the different herbicide mixtures with it. So right here approximately is Zidua. So we have some 3-way mixes going on here and some 2-way mixes. The message is that as you go to the gray bars, the full rates, we see more consistent weed control and higher levels of control. And we also see a benefit of not just, see this has just Authority or Valor, we see a benefit of putting another mode of action with it. Okay, so multiple modes of action, not just for your post sprays, but for your pre-sprays as well. That's the message today. So that's what you write on your little notebooks and, right? Your take-home message. Okay. Who's my timekeeper, by the way? How am I doing? 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's fine. What else should you put in the tank? This shows this population up by just north of Lafayette a little ways. So this is water hemp without any herbicide applied. This is a field use rate of dicamba on that population. Normally in the greenhouse, weeds are a lot more sensitive to herbicides. So you'd get less of a response in the field, which isn't good. That's a failure, right? This is dicamba plus Roundup Power Max. Do you see a benefit? There is. I don't care if it's glyphosate-resistant mare's tail, glyphosate-resistant water hemp, there's still a benefit having glyphosate in the tank. Even though you'd love to pull it out, it controls other weeds, and there can be, I hesitate to say it almost, but synergy when combined with some of your other tank mix partners, okay? Because you're going to find this plant a lot quicker than you're going to find this plant escaping your field. One last thing. This is a bad poster. I wish I had a different one, but it's going to serve the purpose. This is water hemp control from residual herbicide treatments. Which one's better for residual control? Top left or bottom right? Is blurry. Just look at the greenness. Bottom right. Okay. What if I were to, because those weeds are smaller and there's fewer of them. You're going to have to trust me. I was there. I took the pictures. Apparently not very well. But what if I told you this was a $5 biological treatment added to that residual herbicide? Are you a buyer in that market? A $5 biological. It isn't. No biological is going to do that. This is a full rate of our herbicide that costs you $5 more compared to a reduced rate. So that's the message. If it sounded good if it's a $5 biological, why didn't it sound good if it's a $5 more the same herbicide that you have been using? All right. Do I have time for questions? Timekeeper back there?
15 seconds.
15 seconds. Any questions?
Why are weeds getting smarter?
Why are weeds getting smarter? Well, I'm not going to suggest that they aren't. We're just getting dumber. But weeds are adapting. If you think about it, we've tried to confuse these weeds by going to corn, then beans, and then we bring back corn. Then we go to beans again. And then we're going to get tillage out of the way because that's no fun. And then we're just going to rely on herbicides, only herbicides, right? And we're going to do this for 50 years and see if there's any weeds that know how to germinate over a wider period of time. And see if there's any that might survive the herbicide that have been spraying for the last 10 years straight. So they're really not doing anything miraculous. We're just selecting for them very well. So we're finding these weeds not to be smarter, but we're getting better at selecting them. How about that? That's a positive note, isn't it? I like positive messages. We're just damn good at selecting those.
What about Johnson grass? I mean, I got Johnson grass, which I'm getting control of it. But like you said, when you spray Roundup on it, it kills the foliage that I see. But a Johnson grass root will go all the way over to that gentleman.
Right. So Johnson grass is a problem. If we lose Roundup, you know.
The chemical don't go that far, does it?
No, it can't typically. In 1 acre of Johnson grass, a good infestation, you can have over a mile of rhizomes. So if we lose Roundup, then we're going back to some tillage possibly and some other herbicides because it's possibly resistant to other chemistry like the ALS herbicides. They gave me the 1 minute time finger, and it wasn't that finger, but one more